Alright, welcome back. This is now part 4 on our series of ancient Rome. In our last lecture, we talked about the series of events that converted Rome from a republic into an empire. And in this lecture, we're going to cover all of the territory, the time between Emperor Octavian, now Caesar Augustus, all the way up to the fall of the Roman Empire. So a lot to cover today. Remember, one thing that I had said is that it's actually during Rome's Republican phase that they do a lot of their expanding, even though expansion is something that we think of as being explicitly an imperial action. And now during its empire, the thing that really makes it an empire is the idea that it has one person as the main head, main driver of the state. But a couple things about the office of Augustus, or the office of Caesar, or the office of, let's just say emperor, in Rome, is that one, it's not necessarily a hereditary office. This is not an office that just because your dad was the last Caesar means that you inherit the title and you get to be Caesar, even though that does happen sometimes. A lot of times, Caesars will wind up formally adopting their best generals so that someone who's relatively more competent can run the empire. And the other thing about being the Caesar, or being the emperor, is that you do, in a sense, see yourself as kind of a servant of the state, or you exist for the betterment of Rome. Rome doesn't exist as your plaything, something to enrich yourself off of. There are certain Caesars, especially later in the imperial phase, that shift their view, and they start to enrich themselves off the state and weaken the state as a result of that. But that's just a couple things to keep in mind, is that the office of Caesar is not something that is necessarily hereditary, at least not biologically. Remember that we start off with this guy, born Octavian, but eventually inheriting the name of Julius Caesar, and eventually appointing himself as the August one, the Princeps, the Imperator, all of these names, and then combined with the name of Caesar, that don't necessarily name him as a king, but he does have the power of a king. Another thing is that the office of Caesar is largely a military role, while they do technically have power over the formation of laws and different apparati of the state. Most of what they do is military oriented. And so you have this guy, Octavian, Caesar Augustus, and he's claiming not only to be the August one, or the Princeps, all these other titles, but another title that he takes to himself is the Son of God, because he is the adopted son of Julius Caesar. And remember that he is responsible largely for the propaganda that the comet that was seen at Julius Caesar's funeral was the spirit of his adopted father, ascending to Mount Olympus and taking his place among the gods. And interestingly enough, it's during his reign that you have someone else who is born and who is claiming for himself the title of the Son of God, Jesus of Nazareth. We're going to do a whole series on early Christianity after we finish up with our series on ancient Rome, and so I'll get more into that. But Christianity shapes so much of the Roman Empire from the year 0 all the way till its fall, that we're definitely going to be treating Christianity as a main character, a main player on the stage for, I could say the next 500 years, but really the next 2026 years so far, bringing us all the way up to the present. So after after Caesar Augustus, we have another Caesar named Tiberius, and he's the one who's on the throne during the ministry and during the death of Christ. He's referenced in the Gospels, and then later in the book of Acts we have reference to other Caesars. I'm skipping over some of these guys, so I'm sorry I'm not going to talk about Caligula, even though he's really fun and crazy. But this guy that we have down here at the bottom, Emperor Nero, he's the one who officially at the state level, at the Roman state level, he institutionalizes the persecution of Christianity. Essentially, the Caesars have been claiming for themselves the title of the Son of God, and then you have all of these, homeless losers, the apostles and the, later disciples, followers of Jesus, who are saying that this other homeless loser, this, street preacher, rabbi, son of a carpenter, that this guy's the Son of God, and that even though he was killed on a Roman cross, that he rose the third day and he ascended and took his place at the right hand of the Father. And so there's this group of people that Rome sees as being problematic because they're saying that this Jesus of Nazareth character is a son of God, and they're also monotheists, which means that, like the Jewish people, they also have this belief that it's not only that, okay, we have our God and we worship our God, but also all of your gods are false gods and evil and perhaps demonic. And so even though before this you had seen more local clamping down on Christianity, like if you read the book of Acts, you'll hear about the Sanhedrin or this Roman governor who clamped down on Christianity in their province or in their region. Nero, Caesar, is the first one to do it at an empire level, where across the entire Roman Empire, Christianity is illegal. And again, we'll talk more about this on our series on Christianity. But the fascinating thing is that these Christians, they don't pick up swords, they don't fight back, they're not, trying to overthrow the state and start a revolution. When they are asked by the cops, by the centurions, hey, are you a Christian? They just fess up to it, and they don't resist. They allow themselves to be taken away, to be, burned alive, to be fed to lions at the Colosseum. They don't fight back, and so you would expect that this movement would be snuffed out in just a couple months, maybe, however long it takes them to find everybody effectively. But here we are, over 2,000 years later, still making this claim. Not that Octavian is the Son of God or that Nero is the Son of God, but the idea that this homeless Jewish rabbi is the Son of God. And so Christianity not only is not exterminated by these persecutions, by these sporadic and state-sponsored executions of the Christians, but it grows. And in the words of one of the early church leaders, the blood of the martyrs becomes the water that waters the tree of the church. A later Caesar, whose name is Titus, he is the one who officially marches his army on the city of Jerusalem in the year 70 AD, Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord, in order to really try to put to rest this movement of Christianity. And you have Jewish communities. Remember that when I say Jewish, it's like a religious term, but it's also kind of an ethnic term. A lot of the early followers of Christ, most of the earliest followers of Christ, the apostles, for example, are ethnically Jewish. But when we talk about Judaism as a religion, we're talking about people who, they would observe the legitimacy of the Old Testament, but not the claim of Jesus to have been the promised Messiah, and definitely not the claim that he would be the Son of God. So you have, a religiously Jewish community there, religiously Jewish community in the city of Jerusalem, but you also have a large and growing Christian community there. And both groups of these people, they claim that they claim not only that their God is real and legitimate, but they also claim that the Roman gods are false gods. And so they are seen increasingly as problematic. As a Roman citizen, you're expected to admit not only that Jupiter is a god or that Venus is a goddess. You're expected to admit most of all that the Caesar is a god and the Son of God, and they refuse this. And so as a result, the Roman army marches on Jerusalem. Now, in the words of Christ during his earthly ministry, he had warned them of this, and so the Christian community flees Jerusalem at this time. But the city of Jerusalem is sacked and destroyed. The second temple, the temple that was built under the direction of King Cyrus of Persia, the temple that Jesus would have attended during his life and chased the moneylenders out of, that temple is destroyed by the Romans under this Caesar Titus. And so the persecution of the Christians has been institutionalized at the state level, but really as a result of this, because the Christians scatter and they flee out of the city of Jerusalem because of the warnings of Jesus before this, that means that they're scattered to the corners of the empire, and it's almost like a roach infestation. They scatter out of the one hub where they were all gathered, and now they start to populate and disperse and grow and evangelize and increase throughout the entire Roman Empire. So what was seen as an effective way of trying to get rid of the problem has really, for the pagan Caesars, only served to make it worse. Um, I also want to call your attention to this group of people who live a little bit north of the Roman Empire. These are the Germanic peoples. Germanic is kind of a pan-ethnic term and a linguistic term. So, for example, English is a Germanic language. German, obviously, is a Germanic language. Norwegian, Swedish, these would be Germanic languages. But the Germanic peoples would have been organized into different tribes. Maybe you're familiar with some of their names. You have the Goths, you have the Vandals, you have the Angles, the Saxons, the Franks, you have the Nords, so people who might later be known as Vikings. These are all Germanic people. Remember that in the land of France, what we would today call France, that Julius Caesar had conquered, you had a group of Celtic people who had lived there and who had largely been exterminated, at least out of those corners of the empire. And now even a lot of the island of Great Britain that had been Celtic is being ruled by the Romans. But the Germanic people are even ethnically and linguistically distinct from that. So, for example, if you go to Ireland and they speak the Gaelic language, some people speak the Gaelic language there. Gaelic is related to that word Gallic from Caesar's Gallic Wars. But then the Germanic languages are different. They would be, like I said, English and some of these. These are, if you think of the Celts as being the red-headed people, you can think of the Germans as being the blonde-haired people. And again, that's a vast oversimplification. There's, carryover, and it's not an absolute paradigm. But the Germanic peoples in these different tribes, they don't use the same alphabet as the Greeks or the Romans. There's slight differences between the Greek and Roman alphabet, but they use this runic system. They worship Germanic gods. You've heard of Odin and Thor. Odin being the father god, and also a god of war. Thor being the god of thunder. You have Loki, who's the shapeshifter, trickster god. You have Freya and Heimdall and Balder and all these other gods. The Germans are definitely distinct from the Romans, and the Romans view them as kind of the next frontier that needs to be conquered, even though they're never able to ultimately conquer the Germanic people. They see them as the next big threat. We've conquered the Gauls, we've conquered the Carthaginians, we've conquered the Greeks, the Macedonians. So the next real problem that we have is these Germanic people. And so Rome, for hundreds of years, really for a large portion of the imperial phase of Rome, from zero to about 500, the Germans are the main problem, the main thorn in the side of the Roman Empire. And so you have several emperors, 5 of them known as the 5 good emperors, Trajan, Hadrian. We have Marcus Aurelius, who's known as perhaps the greatest of all of the Roman emperors. Their task is to wage war against these Germanic peoples. And remember, what I had also said is that the office of Caesar, the office of emperor, is largely, it's not one where you're really writing laws or overseeing the collection of taxes. It's one where you're leading legions to war. And largely, these men would have been leading legions to war against these Germanic peoples that were a nuisance and a threat to the Romans, or at least they perceived them as a threat. And so, these men are honed by their time in battle. Marcus Aurelius becoming famous for writing the Meditations. It's probably the most famous Stoic work of literature, and definitely worth a read, I would say. But these men are sharpened by their conflict with the Germans, and so I'd used this phrase before, the Pax Romana. Pax meaning peace, the Pax Romana meaning that while you're inside the Roman Empire, things are relatively peaceful, they're relatively stable. You can expect that your taxes would be collected relatively fairly and spent on things that actually benefited your life. And during this time period, we're in the 100s at this point, so from about 100 to about 200 AD. So we're on this side of the cross, on this side of year 0. Things are going well, and I'd say largely it's because of this war, or because a lot of the aggression of the state is pointed outwardly at these Germanic people. I'm not saying that was right or fair or anything like that. I'm just saying that it happened, and it happened to have a largely positive effect on the stability of the empire itself. So these are known as the 5 good emperors, and there's not really this is maybe thought of as the peak, the zenith of Rome's history. Their borders are extended to their maximum extent. You can see that they've gone all the way up, well into Great Britain. Not shown on this map, but they actually conquer all the way out to Babylon in the east. And so Rome is as large as it ever gets. And it's also, like I said, relatively peaceful, stable. It's good to be a Roman person. It's good to be a citizen of Rome during this time. But after this, you start to have Caesars that start to get lazy, that start to largely use the state to enrich themselves. And there is a list of what are called the five good emperors. There's not necessarily a list of, I tend to have my bottom five emperors. And, the first one is Commodus. He's the one, if you've seen the movie Gladiator, he's the one, he fashions himself as a gladiator king. He wants to be a celebrity. He wants to, just use the office to have fun and live the life that he wants to live. Interestingly enough, for all the praise that Marcus Aurelius gets, his son is Commodus. So as good of a job as he did apparently at being an emperor, he did an atrocious job at being a father and at raising someone who would effectively be able to rule over Rome. Now remember what I said, just because Commodus is the son of Marcus Aurelius doesn't mean that he's necessarily going to be the next emperor. So Marcus Aurelius doesn't necessarily know that, but still I think you have a responsibility to raise someone who's not going to go down in history as one of the largest reasons for the fall, the collapse of Roman culture and Roman dignitas. But these men that you see up here, the pattern that starts to emerge in these emperors in the 200s would be a pattern of okay, I control the money supply, which means these coins that used to be made of 100% gold, I'm going to melt them down and I'm going to mix them with, let's say, tin or copper or something like that, and I'm going to make lower value coins. I'm going to debase my currency, so you can think of inflation, a major problem in empires since then and even in the world today. These coins that used to be pure gold and they used to be very, very much worth what they said they were worth, they're now worth less because of the inclusion of these other alloys, these mixed metals. And what am I going to do with all that extra wealth? Well, I've taken my gold and I've melted it down and I've turned it into 10 times as many coins, but now every coin is only really worth 1/10 of what it used to be worth. Well, I'm going to use that to fund an extravagant lifestyle. I'm not going to use that, maybe I use some of this to pay off the military so that they can continue doing their thing on the frontier, but they're going to notice that the coins that they're being paid with are less and less valuable over the years, which means that their loyalty to you is going to degrade as well. But I'm going to use this to fund a lavish lifestyle. I'm going to have orgies. I'm going to have, exotic pets and things like that. I'm going to have several concubines. I'm going to live large, and I'm going to have all the fun that I want. And then what ultimately winds up happening to a lot of these emperors is that they are killed by their own generals or by their own what's called the Praetorian Guard. You can think of them as like the secret service that's responsible for the protection of the emperor. They are killed by their own guards, and one of their generals or one of their guards will just usurp the title of emperor for himself. And this pattern repeats itself so much that this is, the 3rd century. I know I said it's the 200s, but that's the 3rd century AD. So the 1st century would be from 0 to 100. 2nd century would be from 100 to 200. Now we're in the 3rd century between 200 and 300. And you have 26 emperors who are assassinated just in the span of 50 years. So imagine, pretty much every other year hearing that the president had been assassinated and then, his chief general or whatever had just taken his place. And when you take his place, it's not like you're going to have a long, stable career as an emperor. Probably someone's going to do to you what you did to the last emperor. And so as a result of this, we've definitely fallen far from the peak of Roman history. We start to go into a phase where Rome starts to split again and again and again along different lines. And that fracturing of the Roman Empire is really a sign that this thing is entering into its decline phase. The first time that it splits, you have these two rulers. You have a general named Postumus over there in the west, and he names himself as the ruler of Rome. He's not able to get all of the Roman Empire to pledge allegiance to him, but he does get Britannia and Gaul and Hispania, so what today would be, England, France, and Spain, and Portugal, I guess. He gets these places to pledge allegiance to himself, and he institutes what's called the Gallic Roman Empire. And then over on the east, you have this woman, Queen Zenobia. She gets a lot of the provinces in the east, so Syria and the Levant, parts of Asia Minor, and Egypt. She gets them to pledge allegiance to her, and so she's the queen of what becomes known as the Palmyrene Empire. And in the actual Roman Empire, the part of that map up top that's still purple, this actually, counterintuitively, it starts to help some things, because now Postumus and the Gallic Roman Empire over in the west, they can take on the task of having to fight back the Germans, having to contend, with the Franks and the Goths and all of these different Germanic tribes. And in the east, there's also a threat that started to pose itself against the Roman Empire, which is the Sassanid Persian Empire. And this Palmyrene Empire under Queen Zenobia, well, they can just kind of have that battle frontier to themselves. And then, the Roman Empire is again, the part that's still purple here, they don't have as many threats. The Sassanid Persian Empire is kind of a successor state to what we had been calling the Parthian Empire. Remember that the Parthian Empire was the part of Persia, this largest section of Persia that had been conquered by Alexander the Great, and it had been being run by more Greek kings, and while they were run by more Greek kings, they were not considered as much of a threat to Rome, or they were maybe more friendly with Rome. But now they are a Persian, an actually Persian state again, and Zoroastrian becomes the de facto, or the only legal religion there. A lot more religiously and politically authoritarian, and so because of that, they are also expansionistic, which means that they are a problem for the Palmyrene Empire for a while. But as you can see by the dates that I have here, neither of these empires lasts very long before you have a guy, a Caesar named Aurelian, who winds up restoring the entire empire, conquers the Palmyrene and then the Gallic Roman Empire on the east and west, respectively, and he earns for himself the title Restitutor Orbis, or the Restorer of the World. And so that's the first split. Rome splits into three. Next, Rome splits into four, but it's actually kind of intentional. This guy over here on the right side, his name is Diocletian, and he winds up intentionally splitting the Roman Empire into four zones. And remember that the politics of the Roman Empire are going to be largely run by the Senate. The laws, the tax collection, and all that is run by the Senate still. But now we have four Caesars, or Augusti. They call themselves the Tetrarchs. So tet means four, arch means king, means chief, means the one in charge. But you have four tetrarchs who are in charge of these four zones, and so the military task of having to defend these four zones is no longer just under the responsibility of one man, Diocletian, but he adds these other three men to defend these different frontiers. So you have in the west, you have basically England and France that are being defended. You have someone responsible for defending Italy, largely just Italy, because Hispania and North Africa are protected. North Africa doesn't have any major enemies because to the south you largely just have desert. Another tetrarch that's in charge of basically Greece or the Balkan Peninsula, and then Diocletian takes for himself the eastern frontier. The eastern frontier is also the wealthiest frontier. Egypt is the empire's largest source of grain, and the Anatolian Peninsula is a major source of wealth as well. This doesn't last long, however. This lasts, I believe, just over 30 years before you have a man who is, he's originally a tetrarch, Constantine. Down here at the bottom, he winds up restoring and reconquering the entire empire. And he's not content to only rule England and France, or, Britannia and Gaul, they would have called them. He wants the entire empire, and so he conquers the entire empire for himself. Famously, Constantine is also the one, he's the first Roman emperor to officially convert to Christianity. I'll talk more about this in our series on Christianity, early Christianity, but he sees a vision the night before he goes into battle to conquer, what would be Italy, Rome, and he sees a sign in this vision of a cross, and a banner over the cross that says "In hoc signo vinces," which means by this sign you will conquer. Now he's a Caesar, and he knows that the cross is the sign of the Christians, and so he has his soldiers paint the cross on their shields. He wins that battle, and he sees that as a sign that, oh, it must be the God of Christianity that gave me this victory, and so I will now pledge my allegiance to him. He converts to Christianity. Whether you think that was true or false, maybe we'll deal a little bit more with that question a little bit later on. But it's a big deal because the Christianity that had been being suppressed by the Roman Empire is now legalized under Constantine in the year 313 by the Edict of Milan. So again, we have the Roman Empire that had been split into three. It's now split into four and reunited. And then for the last time, it's going to be split into two. Constantine moves the capital of the Roman Empire to the city of Byzantine. He rechristens it. He calls it New Rome, or Roma Nova. And then it's also called Constantinople, named after him. And it's this city that we would today call Istanbul, right on the connection point between the Balkan Peninsula and the Anatolian Peninsula. But that's where he officially moves the capital, and he starts a second senate there, a second lawmaking and tax collecting agency there in Constantinople. But he reunifies the empire. It just now has two capitals. And then the last split that we see is instituted by this man, Theodosius I. Theodosius I, famously also a Christian emperor. All of the emperors after Constantine, except for one, are Christian at this point. And Theodosius is not only a Christian, but he makes it where Christianity is mandatory throughout the Roman Empire, where you are not able any longer to worship the Caesar or worship Jupiter or any Mithras or any of the other more folk gods of the frontier. The claim that Christ is God is legally mandatory. You must believe that. Theodosius is also the last man to be the emperor of the entire combined Roman Empire, because when he dies, he leaves half of the empire to each of his sons. He leaves the Western Empire to one of his sons, with its capital being in Rome, and he leaves the Eastern Roman Empire to another one of his sons, with its capital being Constantinople. And so now you can call these the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. Sometimes the Eastern Roman Empire gets called the Byzantine Empire, but it's important to know, and we'll talk about this even much later when we talk about the Middle Ages. These people didn't think of themselves as Byzantines or something else. They thought of themselves as as Romans, in the same way, like if you had America split east and west, people in California or Texas or Colorado, they would still think of themselves as American, in a sense. But so Theodosius the Great, he officially splits the empire in half, and he's also the one who makes it where Christianity is the only legal religion in the entire Eastern and Western Roman Empire, and you could actually be punished on pain of death for not confirming the claim that Jesus is Lord. So another major threat that starts to emerge are the Huns from the north, led by Attila the Hun, and you can see massive tracts of territory, even though a lot of this is empty pasture land. These are horseback archers, similar to the Xiongnu that we've talked about, very much connected with the Xiongnu that we've talked about when we talked about China, or also later the Mongol Empire. You can think of these as a similar group of people, horseback archers that just sweep over large swaths of territory, and they're able to conquer everything in their wake. And what they do is they create this pressure on the Germanic people, because you'll notice the Empire of Attila the Hun also winds up containing these lands that today would be, Germany, Denmark, the home of the Germanic people. And the Germanic people are pressured out of their homeland into the Roman Empire. So in a sense, the Germans think of the Huns as a larger and more dire threat than the Romans, and so they flee from Attila into the Roman Empire. And they start to populate and to move around and even establish little kingdoms in the Roman Empire. But Attila the Hun, he does not intend to stop where these borders stop. He actually marches, or we could say he rides his cavalry, his army, into the city of Rome. And it's looking like he's going to just straight up take over the city of Rome, the capital of the Western Roman Empire at this point. Whenever the Archbishop of Rome, a man who, that office is one that we're going to wind up calling the Pope eventually, Pope Leo the First. So it's not the Caesar that comes out to talk to him, and it's actually the head, not the head of the state, but it's the head of the church that winds up coming out to meet him, to talk to him. Stories differ on what exactly happens here. I think the official Catholic line is that he shows him a vision of angels protecting the city of Rome, and so Attila the Hun turns away. Other people would say, oh, he gave him a bribe, or he, whispered something to him. We just don't know what he whispered. But whatever the reason is, Attila the Hun actually turns his army around, and at least for now, decides that he's going to leave Rome alone. And, I believe that the consensus is this is a temporary measure. Maybe he has, maybe Pope Leo the First has bought some time for the Roman Empire, but Attila the Hun leaves the Roman Empire. He goes home. He actually gets married that same year, and on his wedding night, he dies. And so some people think, oh, maybe his wife was like a secret Roman or Catholic agent or something like that, or maybe we don't know. We just don't know exactly what happened, but we do know that he dies on his wedding night during that 1 year respite when he would presumably circle back to Rome and try to take them over again, or maybe he wouldn't have. We'll never know. We'll never know what got whispered. We'll never know exactly what happened at that point. But as a result of this, the Huns are largely not a threat anymore. But the damage has been done of pushing a lot of these Germans into the Roman Empire, and so we're approaching the end of the Roman Empire. And the question is asked, rightly so. What is it that actually caused Rome to fall? You have all of these different pressures from without and from within on the Roman Empire. You have the Sassanid Persians who are, fighting in from the east. You have the Huns who are pressured from the north. The Germans who have started to actually take massive chunks out of the Roman Empire in the west. You can see part of France, part of Spain, part of, all of Britannia or England, even a chunk of North Africa that have been taken out of the Roman Empire by these different Germanic tribes. The city of Rome is sacked at 2 separate times in the 400s, actually 3, the final time, by the Vandals and by the Visigoths. And, you can also say, okay, maybe the Roman Empire or the Roman army helped to take down the Roman Empire, because remember, it's during these times that there's a lot of usurpations, assassinations, civil wars, one Roman emperor or tetrarch, marching against another one. And so you can say that the Roman Empire was weakened by these different militaries, but it's also important to know when we talk about the fall of the Roman Empire, we're only talking about the Western Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire, after the fall of the city of Rome, was still intact, and it was largely unscathed. It was largely undamaged. So when we're approaching the year 500, when we're approaching the end of antiquity, ancient history, and approaching the beginning of what we call medieval history, it's important to know that that marker is really only the fall of Rome, the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and not the fall of the entire body of what would have considered itself Roman, including the Eastern Roman, or, like I said, sometimes called the Byzantine Empire. So, you can blame it on a military. I think a major pressure that was causing the Western Roman Empire to decline is inflation, the debasement and devaluation of the currency by emperor after emperor after emperor who abused their ability to mint coins to just deplete the actual valuable precious metals in those coins and to replace it with non-precious metals, and to just use those extra coins to buy themselves, whatever luxuries they wanted, and not actually to benefit the empire. Again, I think that's, we see that happening in several later empires, and as an American, I definitely think that's one of the things that's a major force, one of the largest forces leading to the decline of the current American empire. But I would say, and maybe it's just because I'm on Team Jesus, I would say that the largest force that killed the Western Roman Empire was Christianity, because there are all of these concepts that would have been considered central to what it meant to be a Roman, especially early in Roman history, in the Republic and the early Empire, that are just not compatible with Christianity. And as the kingdom of our Lord, the kingdom of Christendom, is expanding and is, in a sense, conquering the hearts and minds of individual Romans, as the population of Christians increases, a lot of these ideas are just not tenable anymore. You cannot hold these ideas and consider yourself a follower of Christ. So these ideas of glory and domination over, all of these other people groups. You think of some of the early Roman laws, for example, on the fourth table, you have this idea that if you have a deformed child, that you kill it or you leave it out to die, like the Spartans had. Interestingly enough, the early Christian communities, they would go around to the bottoms of these hills where babies were being abandoned, and they would adopt, or they would just, rescue several of these babies, and they would start, some of the world's first orphanages to tend to these people. The concept of slavery that had been central to the Roman Empire is attacked by Christianity. You have some of the early Cappadocian fathers, Gregory of Nyssa and Gregory of Nazianzus. They write treatises against slavery during the period of the Roman Empire, and one of them famously says, you told me that you went to the market today and you bought a young girl slave for X amount of silver. How can you trade something that is so common as a precious metal for this girl who's created in the image of God? Like, this is not something that you should be doing. And so there's even an early abolitionist movement that starts to take place in the Roman Empire. So the institution of slavery that had been central to the formation of the Roman state is also degraded. The worship of the gods, the worship of Jupiter, the worship of Mars, and all these pagan Roman gods, the worship of the Caesar, the cult of Caesar, where you're expected to name Caesar as a god or Caesar as Lord, and to acknowledge the comet of Caesar as being the spirit of Caesar taking his place among the gods and naming the Caesar as a god. The concept of gladiatorial combat, where you have people that are fighting to the death for the entertainment of the masses. All of these concepts that we think of when we think of the Roman Empire are completely incompatible with Christianity. And so as Christianity is on the rise, these Roman distinctives are on the decline. And so I would say, I am quite fond of saying that, the Roman Empire, a couple things. One, when the Roman Empire finally dies, the Western Roman Empire, it is Christ standing over the corpse of the Roman Empire with a sword at its throat, claiming the victory over it. Another thing that I like to, that I'm fond of saying is, you can think of the Roman Empire as almost like a chrysalis that God used for the formation of this body that's going to be known as the church, or known as Christendom. And it is only at the falling away of the chrysalis that you have the emergence of a vital and powerful and in many cases helpful and good institution of the church. And we can talk about what I see as the eventual corruption of the institutionalized church. We'll do that in later lectures, obviously, but at this point, even though people are using the word Catholic, and I know Catholic just gets associated with Roman Catholic or maybe Eastern Catholic today, when a person called themselves a Catholic Christian in the Roman Empire, they just meant, I am a part of this global, universal Christian faith. If you're a Christian in London, or if you're a Christian in Jerusalem or Alexandria or in Rome or in Paris or in Athens, we all believe the same thing. We're all part of this same global Christian family. And so I would say that it's actually Christianity that winds up conquering and killing the Western Roman Empire and emerging as really the most powerful institution in Europe for about 1,000 years thereafter. However, if we're going to talk about the moment where Rome falls, or where a lot of people would agree that Rome falls, it happens in the year 476. Like I said before this, Vandals and Visigoths had, respectively on two separate occasions, already sacked and attacked the city of Rome. However, now you have this other Germanic king of we don't really know where, but his name is Odoacer. And Odoacer winds up marching his army on the city of Rome and taking the crown off of the head of the last Western Roman emperor, whose name is Romulus Augustulus. And he claims control of the city of Rome for himself. Now, as you can see by this map up top, the Western Roman Empire had already been depleted almost completely. You have a little bit of land in northern France. You have what's essentially today Italy and part of what they would have called Illyria, the western coast of the Balkans. That's all that Rome had controlled. All of the rest of the Roman Empire, Britannia, most of Gaul, all of Iberia, all of northern Africa, had been claimed by other Germanic kingdoms. In the east, they're fine. They're chilling. They still have their entire empire intact. The Eastern Roman Empire still is going to survive in various forms for about another 1,000 years. But in the West, the Roman Empire is officially dead, and like I said, it's conquered by this man Odoacer that we don't even really know where he's from. We do, however, know that both Romulus Augustulus and Odoacer would have considered themselves Christians. So this Germanic, would have been considered a barbarian outsider. He would have said, Jesus Christ is King of Kings, Lord of Lords, God of Gods. And Romulus Augustulus, the official, Caesar of what had been left of the Roman Empire, he would have also said, Jesus Christ is King of Kings, Lord of Lords, God of Gods. And that's another reason that I'm fond of saying that it's really Christianity that winds up taking over the Roman Empire, or dealing the death blow to the Roman Empire as it is. So that covers about 500 years of Roman history. We're going to do one more lesson where we'll talk more about the legacy of Rome, some of the cultural distinctives. We'll talk about the leftover institutions that exist, even linguistically. But for now, I just want to remind you guys of this cycle that we've seen play itself out over and over again, and we're going to continue seeing it. You can look around you today at the world today and still see it, where you have men who are strong, and I don't just mean militarily or physically strong, but they have strength of will. They have strength of the values that they hold, and they wind up creating a world that is very good to live in. Strong men create good times. During those good times, people get lazy, they get complacent, they get comfortable, and the men that are produced by those good times are weak. They're weak-minded, they're weak-willed. Oftentimes, they're also weak in body. And so those weak-minded, weak-willed, weak men create very, very bad times that are hard to live through. Rome has seen its peak. It went into decline. And now we're going to see, a period that some people call the Dark Ages. But those Dark Ages are going to create some very strong men. We'll talk, a good deal later about men like Charlemagne. We'll talk about, several of the early church thinkers or writers and thinkers during even the medieval period, and just how that it's growing up in very difficult times creates a toughness to you, and that toughness can help you to shape the world around you into a better environment. But be careful, because that better world that you build is almost certainly going to create some very weak-willed people. So it's also important. This is one thing that Christianity helps the world to break through, where it's like, okay, through the rise and fall of countries and empires over the last 2,000 years, Christianity has been like a bastion of, at least in some corners of it, continuing to produce men who are of will, of mind, and of body, just strong and robust and tough. And that's what the world has always needed, and that's what the world will continue to always need. So that is the entire lesson for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a blessed day.